and again, want to reiterate, absolutely the right thing to do to end our occupation of Afghanistan after 20 years. Absolutely the wrong thing to do to leave the country as if we had nothing to do with the situation they're in, as if we had no moral responsibility to the Afghan people, regardless of who their leaders are, regardless of how their leaders came to power. When we evacuated from Afghanistan, there was $7 billion worth of Afghan assets in essentially what amounts to bank accounts in this country. Of course, the Afghan officials all left. There was some question as to like who had access even to these funds, like who had the login information. That may be a little bit of a but it's more or less like
sort
that.
Of.
And
but this is the Afghan government's funds.
Exactly. And the Taliban, when they gained control of Afghanistan, said that's our money. And presumably, I would not imagine that the Taliban is going to use that money in the way that I would want to use that money. But some of that money would have to go to the Afghan people because surely there is some political pressure on the Taliban by not providing these funds and to operating their civil society in a way that they wouldn't get political pressure from their people. Otherwise, why would we do it in the first place?
Well, there is a massive currency crisis happening now in Afghanistan, and the fact that we're depriving the government of these funds means that the currency is not getting to the people. I have no doubt that the Taliban is going to shave off some for themselves, but the point is that it's a famine in Afghanistan right now. And
so there was political pressure starting to build on Biden in this country to resolve what to do with those funds. In fact, there are some people who believe that you should actually give humanitarian aid on top of those funds. President Biden, in a real show of political courage, I say that facetiously, will essentially allow some relatives of victims of the 9/11 attacks to pursue half of those funds, $3.5 billion, in lawsuits. Apparently, over the course of the past 20 years, we couldn't figure out where to get $3.5 billion when we're spending God knows how many. I think that was probably our monthly budget for a long time in Afghanistan.
Yeah, so this is presumably done for the propaganda value of doing something for the 9/11 victims, yes. Right? But really, it just points a finger at how little we've been doing for those folks.
I mean, the idea that you're going to make the Afghan people pay 20 some odd years later when they're in this situation. And again, we played that clip from Rand Paul the other day. It was like, we've put so much money into that country. It's hard to imagine that they don't owe us much more than $7 billion, which is just an astonishing thing to say if you are, I don't know, it would be an astonishing thing to say if you had only spent like a week from not living under a rock over the course of the past 20 years, as opposed to like being a senator.
Let alone, are we freezing Saudi Arabia's?
Well, yeah, of course. The hypocrisy is. Or
the idea that the Afghan government bears like a special responsibility for 9/11. In this current climate, it's ridiculous. More than our own government.
At the end of the day, it's like, okay, if you want to give that $3.5 billion to a trust fund to pay for, some type of trust fund or escrow account that people could sue, fine. Then just give another $3.5 billion of aid to the Taliban. Of course, he's not going to do that. The other $3.5 billion will go into a trust fund to pay for humanitarian relief efforts. It's unclear what the processes will be for that.
But that's part of the issue too. The humanitarian, like being gatekeepers and picking and choosing how we're going to spend this. The issue is, as experts keep saying, the currency crisis. The only solution to this is to get currency and funds to the Afghan government. We left Afghanistan. We understood that the Taliban was going to take over, and now we're going to deprive them of the money that is being held overseas. Like, people don't even realize the Afghanistan's gross domestic product is $20 billion. This amount of money would really alleviate a lot of suffering that's happening right now.
And when you say about the currency crisis, the problem is that their central bank needs to have a certain amount of capital reserves in their bank, and they don't have it because they don't have access to this money. So it owes money to commercial banks, and without being able to maintain these reserves, the commercial banks don't get their money, and that means that Afghan citizens do not get their money. This is, I mean, it's a mess. It's completely indicative of a problem that the Biden administration has, it seems to me, which is just a complete fear of what is going to be on Fox News tomorrow. We will talk more about that with Heather Parton Digby, because we have seen this. We've seen this movie. Well, it's not a movie, but we've seen this story in the past. We'll talk more about that in a moment.